Tonight on The Halo Show, Soren wears a hat. This lady wears a hat. And Master Chief rarely wears his hat. Hello there guys, girls, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Leipaladen, and we're back reviewing and recapping episode 4 of the Halo TV show. As I was away last weekend, I didn't get the chance to review episode 3, so I'll give my brief thoughts on it. But I didn't think it was too bad, better than episode 2, but not by much. Essentially all that happens is Chief finds out the Keystone is on his home planet of Arithnis 2, he removes his little emotional inhibitor thingy, Cortana is introduced and takes on a very different role compared to the one in the games. I don't mind the idea of Chief discovering more about his humanity, but I could not care less for the stuff with Kwan and Soren. Something that carries through to this episode as well. It's finally occurred to me that this show isn't really made for existing Halo fans. It's closer to being a generic sci-fi story with a Halo skin that loosely follows the ideas established in the games and novels, and once you can see past that, the show becomes marginally better. I enjoyed the episode for what it was, but I still had my issues with it. 5 out of 10. Alright, with that out of the way, let's dive into episode 4. Because of the different storylines running parallel to each other, I'm going to focus instead on each one of them separately and not how they were shown in order of the episode, because there's just too much jumping around from planet to planet that can get a bit confusing. We'll start with Kwan and Soren first because... oh, Christ. The last time I was this uninterested in a B-plot for a show or movie, not even a B-plot, it's more like a C-plot to be honest, was the Canto Bight stuff with Finn and Rose from The Last Jedi. If you've seen that film, you know what I'm talking about. Every time we went to Kwan, I was just waiting to get back to the interesting stuff with Chief and Halsey, or even Silver Team and Miranda Keyes for that matter. After convincing Soren to take her back to Madrigal in his ship, Kwan goes on a quest to find any remnants of the resistance that her dad used to lead before getting killed by the Covenant. Kwan seems to be on this personal vendetta against Vincher as well, which seems a little misplaced. Vincher to me doesn't feel like a compelling enough antagonist because all the stuff he's done to target Kwan, like putting a bounty on her head and selling out to the UNSC, has all happened off screen. At a surface level, he's an asshole. We know that. Anyone who wears glasses like that is a certified 100% asshole, but surely her frustration should be aimed towards the Covenant, if anything, for killing her family and friends, especially since we saw that happen in vivid detail. I'm more convinced in hating Vincher, not because of everything he's done to Kwan off-screen and indirectly, but the fact he's driving some strange, illegitimate love child of the Chevy Tahoe and the Cybertruck. It looks completely ridiculous. Despite having a bounty on her head and the entire planet of Madrigal looking for her, Kwan mouths off to a bunch of people whenever she gets the chance and makes a scene, risking her life and the lives of others, which is just so stupid. One thing leads to another. Vincher hires an assassin called Franco. Come on, that's like the least interesting name ever. Franco, come on, man. Which doesn't go to plan. They try to leave the city in a very underwhelming bike chase scene, and that's basically all that happens with Kwan and Soren in this episode. Okay, on to the interesting stuff now. Spartan125, who has always struck me as a bit of an odd one out amongst Silver Team, has been watching Master Chief's actions very closely the last few episodes, and decides to remove her little emotional inhibitor pellet too. Miranda Keyes, who's operating a research division on the Keystone separately to Dr. Halsey, brings in the other Spartans of Silver Team, with none of them getting the same response from the artifact as Chief. Kai gives Miranda a bit of lip for not seeing the Spartans as actual people and just machines designed to follow orders, and what starts off as anonymity for Miranda slowly turns into a close connection between the two that almost feels like the start of a potentially blossoming romance. Maybe? I mean, I can see it. After she's done experimenting getting the Spartans to touch the Keystone, the scene very abruptly changes directions, with Kai wandering around Miranda's lab almost like a kid in a toy store, showing her status as a member of Needler Gang. Pink Mist, represent, Covey side. I'm gonna stop. Riz mentions a bit about the Sangheili language and what they call the Needler, and suddenly Miranda has a eureka moment and goes down the rabbit hole of trying to unravel Sangheili by using the Spartans as a reference for words they've heard used before. Dude, I'm sorry, but Why did no one think of this earlier? You have all the resources of the UNSC at your disposal, thousands of talented minds, of military officials, of officers, and several dozen scientists. How did no one else think of this? The Spartans have spent the most time around the Covenant of anyone, and in the scene before, Kai literally mentions how familiar Riz is with their language. No wonder the UNSC are losing this war when they're this fucking dumb. The whole moment just felt kind of contrived to me, and like they needed to give Miranda and Kai something to do for the sake of furthering the plot, so everyone else could find out about Halo. But here's the main problem I have with all of this. The Covenant do not appear at all in this episode. Not a single moment in High Charity, nothing with Marquis, they're just not here at all. This is an extension of a larger issue I have with the show in general, where the Covenant just aren't scary. They're not established as enough of a threat for me to take seriously. Outside of the first episode where they wipe those rebels out, we've seen nothing from them that makes me think, oh wow, you really don't want to mess with them. The same way the games and novels did, where they're glassing worlds left, right, and center, and have humanity with their backs against the wall all the time. There's no feeling of urgency to anything in this show. That existential dread that comes from the Covenant and the idea that at any moment they could drop out of slip space, wipe everything out, and there's nothing you can do about it because of their insane numbers and technological advancements is absent. And I think that's because the show is struggling to figure out who its main antagonists are, or there's too many of them. Despite all this digging around for Forerunner stuff that could supposedly change the tide of the war and unraveling the Sangheili language, it doesn't feel important to me because the Covenant aren't a threat. The show has spent more time focusing on how awful other humans are, like Halsey and the Rebels and Vincher. I kind of forgot that I was watching an episode of a show based around Halo, where the whole point of Halo is you shoot and kill aliens. That's the whole point. Finally, there's the story thread with Chief Cortana, Halsey, and creepy Scottish or North English dude, and yes, that's what I'm calling him from now on because I genuinely can't remember his name. Starting off with a flashback sequence that mirrors John and Halsey's chat from the end of episode 2, we see that John has always been a bit of a troublemaker, running off on his own during his early days of training as a Spartan under Petty Officer Mendez. They also used some pretty whack-looking de-aging tech for Halsey that gave me serious Superman from Justice League vibes, when Henry Cavill had his moustache and they had to CGI over it. Something about the skin that looks too smooth and pristine, like it's been heavily airbrushed. I don't know what they're doing over at Marvel for all their de-aging stuff, but it looks a damn sight better than every other film that's attempted it since. Flash forward to the present day, they arrive at Eridanus 2 and find themselves at John's childhood home. Going off his flashbacks given to him by the artifact, John and co start digging around to try and find it. You'd think someone would have brought a metal detector, you know, before they have to rip up his entire front yard, but okay, whatever. John finds a box of old drawings buried under the dirt, with one looking suspiciously ring-shaped. I wonder what that could be. They enter his old house with Cortana projecting what the place roughly used to look like into John's helmet, like an altered reality VR headset kind of thing. This sparks more visions for him and a particularly impactful shot where Chief stands behind himself as a kid. I don't know, man, don't judge me, but something about this moment got me in the feels. Seeing John as a kid and then this massive hulking tank of a man behind him that he'd later go on to become was special in a weird way. John sees briefly where he found the artifact as a kid and what prompted him to do all those drawings, but not before seeing something else. John sees Halsey, preparing him from a very young age before becoming a Spartan, visiting him secretly, it seems like. We get a nice callback to the Fall of Reach with the coin flip, establishing John's luck, and then the flashback ends, with John questioning his loyalty to Halsey. As the Spartans in this universe have had their memories properly wiped, or at least suppressed, instead of just phased out or forgetting them over time due to their many years of training and combat, this must have been something that John didn't remember. Halsey tries to calm him down, but John is not having any of it. The implication that I'm starting to get is that maybe Halsey had something to do with the death of John's parents and his eventual indoctrination into the Spartan program. The tension is rising between those two, so I'm interested to see where they go with it. Halsey is easily the most interesting character on this show so far, and I think Natasha McElhone is doing a wonderful job portraying the detached and scientifically minded side of Halsey, while also being suitably warm and almost motherly when talking to John, even managing to make it feel disingenuous at times and almost like it's a facade. So, did it suck? Yes and no. Like I said before, once you can put aside the idea that this show isn't really made for longtime Halo fans and you switch off your brain a little bit, it's not that bad, as a generic sci-fi romp at least. But another part of me still really doesn't like the handling of these characters. I've heard some compare Spartan Vanek to the Chief of the games and say that he's closer to the Master Chief we all know and love, and I have to agree there. They're both men of not many words and typically duty-orientated. I don't know if this is just another example of misunderstanding the characters and source material, or if it's actually a smart bit of writing and commentary on Chief. Vanek is more like the soulless killing machine side that Chief used to be, with Kai maybe being more human like Chief strives to be. I don't think the writers are that smart, but who knows. Cortana feels like she really doesn't have much to do in the episode aside from stand there and look uncanny. I don't know whose idea it was to make Cortana entirely CG, but I don't think that was the play. The move towards making Halo more of a drama than a science fiction action adventure like it historically always has been also kind of rubs me the wrong way. The writing for the show still feels like it's a bit rough around the edges, with weird mood changes like that bit where Kai goes from like being super moody and angsty in one scene to then suddenly being like a kid during the bit in Miranda's lab. Some of the choices for dialogue are a bit all over the place. The stuff with Kwan and Soren had me spamming that fast forward 10 seconds button like it was cookie clicker. Overall, I'm gonna give this episode a 5 out of 10. Same rating as I gave last week's episode, as they're both similar and feel like filler, to be honest. Obviously, a low budget week for the show as there's no Covenant and no action, but next week is thankfully looking up a little bit. So, what did you think of episode 4 of the Halo television series? Have you even seen it yet? And what are your thoughts on the show so far? As always, if you liked the video, please feel free to pistol whip that like button and go back and check some of my other videos too. I just released a video yesterday that talks about the Master Chief Collection and the most recent update for it, and I would massively appreciate it if you guys gave that one a watch. If you want to stay notified for when more of my content comes out, hit that subscribe button. You wouldn't. You're way scared.